But if you have questions, there's two ways that you can submit a question today through the Q&A panel over on the right-hand side of the screen. You can submit a question via text, and I will happily answer that. Or you can raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, then we can bring you on video and we can have a conversation. Up to you. All right. Well, there's Garanga. Well,
Hi,
hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you? We've talked a lot on LinkedIn. You're talking to a lot of people on LinkedIn.
Yes,
I think you keep asking these questions, you're going to have a massive body of knowledge. You'll be a fantastic data management consultant.
thank you.
Well, how can I help you today?
Yes, I just to get in touch with you so that I can ask some question and I can get more knowledge and so that I can able to create an data strategy or data management strategy for our knowledge purpose. Okay.
Hmm.
So when you're going for an initial pitch up, right, for an MDM. Okay, so how we can start the conversation with the customer, or what we can ask and initially that whether they really want for go to for an MDM solution is required for them or not, because a lot of things people are mix and match the everything. They want data quality
Yeah.
solution, they're telling MDM.
Yeah.
So how we can differentiate these things?
Now, when you say customer, I assume you mean your internal stakeholders, that you would mean users in marketing or in finance or in accounting, but internal customers,
Yes,
correct?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, got it. So in the MDM world, what I often see is that pain, for lack of a better word, challenges, pain, brokenness are expressed initially often in the form of analytics and reports. So often a great starting place to engage a conversation with stakeholders that could lead to MDM conversations is to talk about the state of reporting, right? To have conversations about how do you feel about your customer reports or your supplier reports, or doesn't matter, but how do you feel about those? Do you feel like the information that you're seeing in those reports is accurate? Do you feel like you have a consistent view of I'll just use customer data, but a customer view of customer data, or accurate or consistent? That's a great word to use, consistent customer data, because if the data is inconsistent, that could be suggestive of challenges related to governance or challenges related to MDM. Maybe there's even duplicate customer records. But a great place to start with conversations with folks on the business side is just to talk about how confident they are. Do they trust the data that they're seeing in the reports? And chances are they're probably going to say, well, no, not really. I have to pull data from multiple places to get a full view of my customer. Or the data from this report is inconsistent. It says this thing for this customer, it says something different for the same customer through a different metric or a different lens. So often starting conversations through reporting lenses is a great place to understand, are there MDM challenges or are there not MDM challenges? And typically there almost always are.
Okay, thank you.
That's one place to start. Um, I think that's usually just the easiest one, because MDM can be really complex, right? It can be really difficult to understand for end users, right? And if you start by the conversation by saying, well, we're going to create a gold master record, or we're going to create a single version of the truth, often it's difficult for end users to understand that. But if you can kind of speak their language, understand the reports that are important to them, understand the how that data is being used, I think pretty quickly you can start to see if there are challenges that would be solved by MDM. Typically in the form of duplicate records, inconsistent data, untrustworthy, inaccurate data. That could be a data quality problem as well. But starting with reports, great place to start. I see John Moran. Awesome. Oh, I see Jimmy. We got a good crew coming here. So everybody, we've got a couple of different ways that you can submit questions. One is that you can raise your hand in the Q&A panel on the right-hand side, and if you raise your hand, then you'll be here talking with me, and we can interact just like I was just doing with Garanga. Or you could just submit a question via text, the text Q&A. There's John. Yeah, we can. Happy
Awesome.
Friday. Gee,
Happy
I just
Friday.
talked to you. I just talked to you a couple days ago. This is cool.
Just feels like it was just yesterday.
It,
So I
it
have a
may have been.
question.
Yes.
We're doing our strat planning, strategic planning for the next couple of years. Data governance is still somewhat new to some of our executives, but they ask great questions. And I wanted to toss this over to you. So what they ask is, what do great companies do when they implement data governance? Where do they start? And I guess that's my question to you. It's just for folks like we have a huge company, global company. We manufacture, but we also have distribution. We're in the life sciences space. So what would you like? Kind of, could you riff on that a little bit in terms
Yeah.
of where do great companies start first
Yeah.
implementing data governance?
Well, fantastic question. I used to hear this all the time when I was a Gartner analyst. And the short answer is, and I think you already know this, but I'm gonna affirm what I think you already know, given our previous conversations. But the very short answer to the question is to focus on the greatest business value with a disclaimer. With a disclaimer. Also, go where you are wanted and needed, right? So often I would see people, I would say, okay, well, go where there's the biggest business pains, go where there is the most disruption caused by a broken business process or poor data quality or a lack of data integration. Go find the areas where the business is expressing the greatest amount of pain, where you can put a process centric wrapper around your governance efforts. Meaning, don't look at things through the lens of a domain, right? That's a trap, right? I would hear that all the time with my previous clients when I was at Gartner. It's like, how are you going to limit your scope and where are you going to focus? Well, we're going to focus on the customer domain. That's absolutely a trap, because you'll end up, one, being unable to articulate or quantify the value that your governance efforts are going to drive, because customer data is everywhere, and you'll end up in a 12-month prolonged initiative just focused on that data. It'll be really difficult to articulate exactly how you're driving value. Two, the scope almost always creeps when it comes to customer data. Three, you out of the gate on day one at a evolving governance program, you're going to need extremely high levels of data governance maturity. If you are focused just on the customer domain that is touching all sorts of different departments, divisions, groups, you're going to need relatively high levels of maturity that you probably don't have. So the short answer here is to try to put a box around a business process, something like onboarding suppliers or onboarding customers or cross sell or upsell. The list here is long, but take a process centric lens and use that to put a box around a governance initiative. And so that's step one. Step two is kind of parallel to that, is really go where you're wanted, right? I see a lot of people try to push stones up a hill, and the stones just keep running down because they're going where they think they could add the most value, but they may not necessarily be wanted. You could have business stakeholders who don't see the value of governance, or who have clearly kind of totally different incentives, but finding a willing partner on the business side who has those pains and who's willing to investigate things like maybe changing how they manage their supplier onboarding, or changing how they manage their customer onboarding, or changing how they manage some of their marketing related processes. Finding that willing business partner is going to be really key. So keep your scope small, be able to quantify the business value, find a business partner who's willing to partner with you is a great step. Lastly, I would say, you do need to have some sort of framework that you are applying here, right? There are a lot of different frameworks. Gartner had one. DAMA, DAMA has a great framework for governance, right? That outlines all the things that you need to be focused on. But don't get too caught up in that framework, because what you're going to find is that to enable a framework driven approach, you'll have to focus on 7 or 8 or 9 things, right? You have to focus on security and access and ethics and all sorts of different aspects of that framework that may not be necessary to enable those outcomes that we were talking about at the beginning, right? So be pragmatic. I think that's kind of number 4, is really be pragmatic. Don't take this dogmatic approach and say, oh, okay, I'm implementing the DAMA framework here, so that means I have to do all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Do the things that are going to enable that outcome, enable it, get a business sponsor totally excited about what you're doing, and then when you do it and when you deliver the value, wave the flag. Say, hey, look what we did. Bing, bing, bing. Look at the value that we drove. Don't be afraid to market yourself. Don't be afraid to say, hey, we're driving real value for the business. So that's the longer answer to the question, John.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Good to see you. All right. Do we have any others? Nobody's raised their hand. I see a bunch of folks. I see Zach. I see Jimmy. I see Tim. Again, guys, if you have questions, maybe it's Friday morning, maybe you're Pacific Coast time, and you're not ready for prime time of the video. That's cool. On the Q&A tab over on the right-hand side in the Q&A panel, you can just ask a text question, and I will just answer that here. Or if you do want to be on video and you're okay with that, go ahead and raise your hand in the Q&A section. Oh, Tim, yeah, love it. Looking at the chat, if you've got timeline, yeah, reference data, great starting point. By the way, I love that, particularly if the reference data is solving one of those business problems that I was talking about. A great example would be using maybe even like a third-party data source when it comes to reference data, right? Like a Dun & Bradstreet or others, where maybe you have a challenge related to corporate hierarchies. Maybe you're B2B and you've got a real challenge with corporate hierarchies. Using a reference data source like Dun & Bradstreet, implementing that into a CRM, implementing reference data into ERP systems, yeah, it can be really, really great to accelerate and deliver value very, very quickly. Because the greatest thing about reference data, we can have a separate conversation. Is D&B data or other data like that really reference data? If you use it that way, meaning if you say, okay, I'm going to take D&B data and I'm going to assume it's correct, right? It's not always correct, but just if you assume it's correct, that really, really accelerates a lot of governance related initiatives, right? Because you don't have to spend time defining what a business entity is or isn't. You don't have to spend time defining how those hierarchies are structured, because the Dun & Bradstreets of the world are doing it for you. There are plenty of other reference data sources out there. There's like ISO. I mean, the list of sources of reference data is very, very long. So Tim, love it. Great idea. But I would just kind of put it within the context of just make sure it adds value. Make sure it's solving a problem. Just don't do reference data for reference data's sake. But a great way to accelerate governance related efforts, because generally people aren't going to argue that there are 50 states, right? Right. And that CA means California. So that's an example about reference data. You're generally going to have not a lot of people push back and say, hey, this data is incorrect or it doesn't meet my needs. Any other questions? Exactly. Yeah. So love it. We're on the same page for sure. Looking for more questions. So governance is a big one. When I was a Gartner analyst, it was probably 30% of the questions that I had were related to how do we do governance, and sadly, a lot of companies are still really struggling with it. It's just so hard, and the answer of why at the high level is because most companies are unable to articulate how governance actually drives business value. There's a disconnect between investments in governance and the delivery of business value. Selling more, reducing costs, reducing risks, right? Banks kind of figured this out, and insurance companies figured this out from the reduction of risk perspective, because they were able to check a box to say we're operating in a compliant or regulatory friendly way. But for a lot of companies, that connection there is still really, really loose. And when you lack that connection, it's kind of creates a bit of a negative feedback loop, because everybody in if the people in the organization can understand how their actions are negatively or positively impacting data and how that is actually helping improve business performance, then they're more likely to care less about data quality or data consistency or what they're doing from a day-to-day perspective. So there's most certainly this negative feedback loop that can exist when you are unable to tie the investments that you're making from a data perspective and the delivery of business value. So Jimmy, I think we originally met. You were like a salesperson for me when I was at Newstar. I'm pretty sure you were maybe at Oracle. Yes, exactly. And now you are a rock star salesperson at Databricks. Yeah, Newstar, exactly right. So when I was at Newstar, so Jimmy, who was on the line today, was I believe at Oracle and tried to sell. I don't know what you were trying to sell at the time, Jimmy. Didn't matter, but you were a brilliant salesperson and a super friendly guy. But Newstar was one of the places where I certainly learned a ton about MDM and data governance, and often, guys, in many ways, because of some of the failures that we experienced there. So, a lot of the best practices that I shared as a Gartner analyst, and I'm sharing now at Profisee, came through some of the things that we learned by implementing and really kind of bootstrapping an MDM and data governance program while at Newstar. So, learned a lot about, is it a good idea to try to use your CRM as an MDM? Answer: no. But we tried that. We actually built a little stewardship UI within Salesforce, and we thought, yeah, we could use Salesforce as ESB. Okay, yeah, that's right, Jimmy. Thank you. Garanga, you're gonna ask me about data mesh? Oh my goodness. Okay, we'll get to data mesh. I see another question from John. Oh, data catalogs. What is a compelling reason for business users to use a data catalog? Well, there's a lot of, and I'm not ignoring your question, Granga. We'll get to the question about data mesh, but it's, I think that's a bit of a rabbit hole that could probably eat up a lot of our time that we have here. Data catalogs, interesting. So, okay, cool. I just went to a conference 2 weeks ago, last week in Boston. Man, the time is flying by. In Boston, it was a CDO-centric conference. It was a CDO IQ. And as usual, there are the all the vendors in the exhibit hall, and easily half of the vendors were selling data catalogs, which really surprised me. Right, there were a couple of MDM vendors. There were a few other, the standard kind of consultants, and a few others that we would expect, analytics, BI, that kind of thing. But half were data catalog vendors. And I think we can thank the data fabric and the data mesh and a few other things that are going on in the space for this kind of focus on data catalog. But how do you implement them? Great question. They're increasingly, data catalogs are able to run and rely on AI and ML. So, kind of the discovery and profiling process can be in many ways, I wouldn't say fully automated, because that's not quite true, but they can certainly be automated. But when it comes to implementing catalogs, I would go right back to the conversation that we would had, right? Like, what business problem are you trying to solve, right? Why implement a catalog? And for a lot of organizations, the answer to that is, well, it's step one of a governance initiative, right? Because I need to know what's out there, right? I need to know my as is. I need to take a snapshot of my data landscape and know what's there. That's true. That part is true. But what I would do as a part of a catalog initiative, you can kind of view catalogs as like a bottom up, right, initiative. Like, you're kind of starting at the bottom. And what I would recommend is that while you're starting that bottom up, to also have the top down. The top down would be that view of a business outcome. And once again, you need to try to understand, is there a business partner, business stakeholder out there that's going to really benefit by having this data catalog in place? What problem is it going to solve? Maybe it would solve a compliance related problem. Maybe it would solve an audit related problem for a specific business holder. Often I see audit driving in some of these efforts as well. But yes, it's okay to take the bottoms up initiative, but again, be able to tie that initiative back to some sort of top down business outcome that you're going to drive through the catalog. Sadly, though, I just see a lot of companies spending a lot of money on building data catalogs because they're rushing towards the data mesh and they're rushing towards the data fabric, and they're saying, oh, okay, well, we need to do governance, right? And we want to do MDM, and we want to do predictive analytics and get better at analytics. So our consultant said we need to go do this as is, and we need to get our hands around all of our data. That means we need to go implement a catalog. That's okay, and that's cool, but I would just say don't do it for the sake of implementing a catalog, or necessarily even for the sake of doing all those other things that I was talking about, which are noble, and you'll probably have to do. But find the business reason and make sure that you can tie those initiatives back to something that a business stakeholder is going to care about. All right, I see others that are joining. Oh, so I'm glad. I see you asked a question, so that's great. How should a data department and IT department work out together on data governance scope? Great question. Are there any recommended networks, frameworks, or approach for companies that are starting their data strategy? Yes, most certainly. So from the framework perspective, I kind of mentioned this before. That there are many that are out there. DAMA has some very great frameworks that I would certainly recommend. But in terms of kind of how to engage the business on data governance and limit scope, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, guys. I know this, but it's really about solving a business problem. Find a business problem. So getting back to what I learned early on is that if you don't have a well-defined business problem, meaning driving revenue, reducing costs, or reducing risk, right? The first time that I ever started on MDM, I was looking at it and data governance. I was looking at those problems through the lens of data problems, not business problems, data problems, right? What I saw in our data was inconsistent data, duplicate data, low quality data, untrustworthy data. And I embarked on a governance initiative to fix the data, right? So what I did is that I put together this report, this analysis, several page analysis that led into a PowerPoint, about a 12 slide PowerPoint deck that I took to our CFO and I said, look, our data is broken. Our data is low quality. We've got problems with our data that is creating downstream problems in all of our workflows, all of our processes. And my CFO said, okay, wait a minute. You're telling me that our data is bad. However, my auditor is telling me that the data is good. People in my department under the CFO, they're saying the data is good. We're a publicly traded company. Our books are audited every quarter. Who am I supposed to believe, our auditor or you? So what I did was I went back and then I worked with business stakeholders to figure out, okay, what is really, really challenging? And in my case, that answer was, and what was really, really broken was cross-sell, upsell. I had people in sales who had specific targets, right? Their bonuses literally in sales were tied to be able to cross-sell, meaning if you sell to division 1 within a corporate hierarchy, are you selling to division 2? The same thing could be true in a consumer space where you sell to one member of a household, but you don't sell to another member of a household potentially, or even a family, right? So that was the business problem that we were focused on. I sat down with business stakeholders and said, okay, how could governance and MDM, but how could data governance help you solve this problem? We lacked a consistent definition for customers. We lacked a consistent hierarchy for customers. And we figured out very, very quickly that implementing some basic governance steps, right? Consistent customer definition, 360 view created by that consistent customer definition, plus the overlay of customer hierarchies, those three things together could solve for a problem that somebody in sales really cared about, because it was the difference between making their bonus and not making their bonus. So that's one example of finding a very specific problem that can help you start to talk about implementing governance processes, implementing policies and procedures to improve your data governance, right, that drive tangible business results. A lot of the other conversations I was having before I left Gartner were around supply chain. Obviously, things are very broken right now around the globe when it comes to supply chain. There are companies that are wrestling with supply chain optimization who don't have a single 360 view of their supplier. So that may be one other example of how you could maybe engage people on the business side to have specific conversations around, okay, what's broken? What is a massive challenge for you? Where are some of your biggest pains? And can improving our data help you solve for those? If the answer is yes, chances are the answer would be yes. That's a great way to initiate a data governance program. But you don't even have to call it governance. It's interesting. I was at this conference last week where people were talking about their successes with data governance, but never using the word governance. They had data enablement programs, right? They had other programs that were most certainly data governance, but they found a way to not call it data governance. And that actually helped create an environment with some of the business stakeholders where they were open to have the conversation, because it wasn't this kind of this top down, thou shalt type approach. It was, hey, how can I help you? Which is a very, very different approach. So even just kind of a twist on a noun can be very, very powerful thing. Oh my gosh, Garanga, you've got all really, really great questions. Let's get back to the mesh, but I do want to call out, we've got some other folks on as well. Zach or Fabrice, if you guys have got questions. Looks like we're just kind of sticking to the chat, and that's cool. It's working for me as well. Um, uh, but I do see some in the Q&A. Oh, Ben, you're not allowed to ask questions. Oh yeah, you are. I'm just kidding. But let's go back to the chat. Mesh. Oh my goodness. So Garanga, what was your specific question about? What's my view on the data mesh? Okay. I will tell you, I will be honest and tell you I'm a data mesh skeptic. I am a data mesh skeptic. And the reason why is because over the last 3 years, I've spoken with literally thousands of data management professionals, and most of those conversations, the challenges that were underlying them were related to the fact they were largely running impromptu data mesh architectures without calling it a data mesh. Meaning, so many companies are out there operating in a highly decentralized way, right? Companies are out there where marketing is doing their own thing, finance is doing their own thing. And sure, you can call that a data product if you want, right? You can say it's a data domain and it's data products. But what was happening and what I was seeing day in and day out was that marketing and supply chain, for example, right? CRM versus ERP, but marketing was doing their own thing and supply chain was doing their own thing. Nobody said that they had data products and they were implementing a data mesh, but that was how the organization was running. Concurrent to that, conversations I was having was, you know what? That's okay. That's great, but we need to solve for, meaning the decentralized approach to data management, marketing doing their own thing and supply chain doing their own thing. That's actually okay. And our business is functioning. We're hitting our numbers. We are, we're doing okay. But we need to run better. We need to be faster. We need to support a digital transformation. So we need to solve for the centralized approach to data management as well. We need to do both, right? We need to allow for decentralization and centralization. Now, I recognize kind of the mesh says that, right? The mesh says, okay, well, you need to support both decentralized and centralized. But so many companies that I see are struggling with one or the other, and the ability to do both requires very, very high levels of data governance maturity. And I think the kind of the concept of the mesh is relatively solid, right? Meaning it's okay. That's where we kind of really want to get. We want to get to a combination of decentralized marketing doing its own thing and meeting their customer needs the way that they think that they need to make their customer needs. But from a centralized perspective, from an enterprise-wide or a corporate perspective, that focus is equally valid. Meaning, if your CEO asks how many customers you have, there can only be one answer, right? The answer can't be, and trust me, I've tried to answer the question this way. The answer can't be, well, it depends. Mr. or Mrs. CEO, it depends. Who's asking? Why? What's the purpose of the data that you're using? You can't do that at a C level or even a VP level or even a senior director level. That's not how you as a data professional, that doesn't help kind of prolong your career. And again, you can trust me on that one. There can only really be one answer. So you need to solve for both. And I do know that the mesh says to do that, but I'm a bit of a skeptic because I think it puts too much of a premium on architecture first, not business outcomes first. And what I'm seeing over and over and over right now, what I'm seeing out there in the market, what I'm seeing out there and talking with data management professionals, this focus on data mesh, this like increasingly increasing focus on data mesh and data fabric is an architecture first approach that, in my experience, is a bad approach. Don't lead with architecture. The architecture should support the business strategy. So it should be a strategy centric approach first, not architecture first. And when you take an architecture first approach, rarely does that lead to optimal outcomes for the business, in my experience. So I could rant about the data mesh for a long, long time, but oh my gosh, qualities of data governance. So John, I see your question. We'll get to that after that rant. I do need a bit of a sip of coffee here. Oh, selection of an MDM tool. What parameters to keep in mind? Okay, Garanga, this is also a bit of a tough one. Probably we get into the details here. We can take it offline. We do have some tools through Profisee that can help with selection. We do kind of have an RFP type template that you could use. If you were talking to Gartner, they would tell you that there are 13 capabilities that are sitting underneath all enterprise class MDM solutions, right? So what you need to do is to kind of, a great approach is to take an RFP type approach, again, through the lens of the specific problem you're trying to solve. But there are a lot of RFP templates out there. We at Profisee have one. It's a good starting point because it'll at least understand and create kind of a straw man to allow you to say, okay, for each of those capabilities, then what are the kind of the functions supporting all those capabilities? So examples of some of these capabilities are data governance, right? We've been talking about that a lot. Data stewardship, data quality, data integration, workflow. All of these things are capabilities that support MDM, right? And so it can get fairly complicated. Inevitably, you will probably have to make some trade-offs in terms of what are priority from a capability perspective. But I do like the kind of the taking the RFP centric type approach, and we have a spreadsheet that can help with that. Best way to do it is to understand what your priorities are for each of those capabilities, and then to go engage your stakeholders. Work with a vendor who is willing to do some sort of a POC or at least a sort of beta test who can work with you, get stakeholders involved, play around a little bit with the tool, and then actually have the stakeholders rate on each of those capabilities that I was talking about, rate your individual vendors. So the perfect scenario here, this can take some time. So this may not be the best fit for all companies. This to do it the right way can take some time. But if you establish that framework, again, could be just an Excel spreadsheet, right? The perfect scenario here is where you establish that you assign some priorities to it, right? Both you would do that as a data management leader, but then your users would do that as well. They would assign their individual priorities, and then they would score each of those capabilities through some sort of POC type experience. Where you'd love to get to is that you've had, 10, 15, maybe, depending on the size of your company, but all of your key stakeholders, particularly the folks that you would have doing data stewardship and data governance type roles, get those people involved, get them involved in the POC, get them involved in scoring each of the vendors, right? Where at the end of that process, you could come back and say, okay, vendor A scored 9 out of 10 on this capability. Vendor B scored 8 out of 10, and on and on. To take as much of a scientific approach here as you can. Now, I acknowledge for a lot of companies that can be a fairly time-consuming exercise, but at the end of that process, you've pretty much got a bulletproof business case. Right? It's not a business case, but you've done all of your homework that you could do from the perspective of engaging all of your stakeholders, have them involved in the process. Then it's going to be really, really difficult for the stakeholders to come back and say, well, you didn't pick the right solution, because what you're going to be able to say is, hey, we did a scorecard exercise, right? We asked you what your priorities were, and then we actually even asked you to use the tool. So taking an RFP type approach, going through some sort of scorecard exercise, working with a vendor who will happily partner with you on a POC, those are all things that are important in MDM evaluation. Oh, Tim, man, you've got all sorts of nuggets. Totally agree. Good, thank you. Your data, yeah, don't use the vendor data. Now, in those POCs, what you're going to probably be forced into, and this is okay, but like in a perfect world, and the world isn't perfect, But in a perfect world, you would be in that POC experience. You would be trying to mimic your workflows, your data quality rules, your governance rules. In a POC experience, though, that's probably going to be fairly difficult. So you're going to have to work with the out-of-the-box business rules that come from those vendors, because there's going to be a fine line between a limited scope POC and literally a deployment, right? Because if you are configuring all of your business rules, your steady state, your production level business rules as a part of a POC, you could be in a several week exercise, and you're probably not going to find a lot of vendors who want to do that. So you will have to kind of just live with the out of the box business rules that come from a lot of the MDM vendors. But the key here, Tim, you nailed it, is to use your own data, not their staged data, right? And again, another perfect scenario here is to set acceptance criteria, right? So not only are you using the tool and you're figuring out how to configure it, but particularly when it comes to matching, right? And data quality, what are your acceptance criteria? What do you think? Can you model out in advance using your data to say, okay, we expect these 5 records, Acme, Acme Inc., Acme Co., Acme LLC, we expect them to be matched at a relatively high confidence, right? So even having acceptance criteria could even be great, but the key there is using your own data, because you know what to expect. You know what's coming in one end and you know what's going out the other. Couldn't agree more. Great point, Tim. How do you measure ROI for MDM? Oh boy. Um, I had so many conversations with data leaders that think this is impossible task. And I'm here to tell you it is not. You can absolutely positively measure the value of better data. Now, yes, in some cases, the core drivers here, the connection between better data and better business outcomes, there are several levels there. They're not necessarily direct, right? They're indirect benefits, and this is where it can kind of get challenging for a lot of business folks, is that those indirect impacts. But sometimes those impacts can be relatively direct. So when it comes to building a business case for MDM, all else being equal, right? And let's keep in mind that your business priorities and your business strategy should be driving a lot of the decisions here. But all else being equal, I love sales and marketing use cases to help build business cases for MDM. Reason is because chances are very, very good your organization already has models defined that say, okay, if I have a qualified sales lead, right? If I've got a qualified lead, what are the likelihood that that lead will close, right? And how much revenue is it going to drive? Chances are your marketing people already know the answers to those questions, and those models are well established and have been around for a long time. So if you can use MDM to support increasing lead quality, right, then you can support conversion, which means you can support revenue, right? This is why I love the kind of the cross sell, upsell, identification of white space. Those 3 use cases, I love those because they're very easy to quantify, and you're not going to get a lot of argument from sales and marketing, because again, chances are those models already exist, right? So you can absolutely build an ROI here. The key step is to make sure you partner with the people on the business side who would own creating and managing those models, right? The people here on the business side are typically kind of always the same, right? They're the people that are involved in forecasting, the people that are involved in business planning and long range planning. They're the people that are like the Excel experts working for VPs and directors and SVPs that are helping do the annual budgets, that are helping do the annual planning. They're kind of like the trusted people when it comes to business planning and budgeting and forecasting for those business leaders. So chances are very good, if you have a senior director of procurement, or if you have a director of supply chain or a VP of supply chain, that he or she has a couple of people that they trust when it comes to building models related to supply chain management. Find those people that those senior leaders trust and sit down with them and say, okay, if we reduce the number of duplicates in our supplier database by 20%, what do you think that would do? Right? Do you think that would improve our ability to deliver, to receive goods at the right time? Do you think that would speed up our production chain? Do you think that would reduce the number of incorrect deliveries from our suppliers, right? So finding the things that the business cares about, finding the people that are managing the analytics for those processes, and then sitting down and trying to model out what you think would be an improvement through better supplier data or customer data or asset data or product data. Again, the list here is very, very long, but it's all about finding the right people, because once you build one of these business models, once you build this business case, right, once you collaborate and build it, you're going to take it to that business leader. And the first thing that that business leader is going to ask you is, where did this data come from? And the best answer that you can give is, I worked with your person, your senior analyst supporting your forecasting, your budget person, and they're the ones that put the model together. Oh, okay. Right. The least effective way for you to do it is for you to just own it, or the data management organization or the governance organization or the MDM organization to own creating a business case in a vacuum. Because if you take it to your business leaders and they say, where did this come from? And they say, well, I created it. I estimated these numbers. They're going to say, okay, well, what do you know about my business? Right. You live in the governance organization. You live in the IT organization. These are probably just guesses. And, how am I supposed to trust the guesses? So working with the right people and building out models is a key aspect of understanding ROI. Questions keep coming in. Organization with no governance. Hoy, I'm looking at your question here. Oh boy, data catalogs, data quality, and MDM all at the same time. Well, that would certainly be a challenge in and of itself. So I think the question here is that you lack governance and you're looking at potential tools and solutions, and which one should you do first? Oh goodness. Well, I wouldn't certainly do them all at the same time. I think you're seeing a common theme in some of the insights that I'm sharing with you guys around trying to identify specific business pains or business problems, right? That's what I would do. Hoy, in the case of what you're trying to do, whether it's governance, whether it's implementing a tool, find a specific business pain, right? Maybe that business pain is solved simply by implementing some sort of data quality solution, which may not even require technology, by the way. You can do MDM without MDM software. Yes, I work for an MDM vendor. I should probably be careful, since they're paying, it's paying my mortgage. But at the same time, MDM is both a software solution. It's a discipline. It's first and foremost a discipline. Same with data quality. That is first and foremost a discipline. It's not necessarily a tool, right? So I would find specific business problems, specific challenges, things that are broken in the business, because the data will not allow you to optimize that process, and then work backwards from there to try to figure out what's going on, right? I have worked with some manufacturing centric companies that have amazing MDM, right? Generally because they only have a single source of supplier data or customer data. They tend to be very, very big manufacturing companies without a lot of customers, right? That are making like maybe cement or jet airplanes or jet engines or that kind of thing. We have a limited number of customers, but where their MDM processes are really quite good, right? Where the onboarding of a customer or where they're onboarding of a supplier, but there are still data quality challenges, right? So I wouldn't assume that you have to implement one tool at the same time. I would actually look to try to implement them individually, but focused first and foremost on those business problems that you're trying to solve. If you're implementing technology for technology's sake, that's a massive red flag. You need to understand why you're doing it and be able to describe from a business outcome perspective the reasons for it. Data governance without implementing MDM. Oh, so 1 second. Still drinking coffee and it's 11:45. I guess it's Friday. Data management, data governance, MDM. Well, so the pithy, I'm looking at Garanga's last question in the chat here. Kind of the pithy insights that I used to give and still give is that you can implement a data governance program without MDM in theory, but you cannot implement MDM without a data governance program. You just can't, right? Data governance is policy and procedure, right? It's the what. MDM is really the how. Policy, implementation, execution, management of policy. All right. So MDM is very, very good and important to help implement those policies that you are creating within a data governance environment. So if you don't implement MDM, your data management processes will most certainly be suboptimal. And I think that you will be challenged to fulfill the goals of your data governance program. So they are hardwired together, right? They are better, most certainly better together. When I would get the question from my clients at Gartner is like, what comes first? Is it data governance or is it MDM? The answer that I would always give is that chances are they should be implemented together, particularly if you take kind of an agile MVP, meaning minimum viable product. If you take an outcome driven approach to solving a business problem, chances are very good that data governance and MDM will be implemented together, right? But in a very, very limited scope approach, where you're not trying to solve for an entire data governance framework. You're not trying to solve for multi-domain MDM mastering all of your data at the beginning. You would be focused and limited in supporting and driving some form of a business outcome. So they would be tied together. So it's not an either or what comes first. They're going to be tied together. And a good way to think about this is let's assume that you had an MDM tool, like you just went out and bought one like today, and you had to implement it. Well, all MDM software and all data governance and all data quality and all data integration, all data management software requires rules, right? You have to configure the rules. The software just does not work out of the box intuitively. The software can't tell you how to manage your data. Although, with AI and ML, things are improving. Separate conversation, but rules need to be coded into this software. They need to be configured into the software. Those rules are governance rules. So even something as simple as how do I define a customer, right? That's a governance choice. That's a governance policy, right? Is it current customers? Is it people that are paying? Is it people who are on a trial? May not be paying, but they're a trial. Is it past customers? Is it everybody who's ever given us money, or is it only people who are giving us money now? Right? Chances are you guys have had these conversations within your organization. The answer to those questions are governance answers. And if you make a decision that you say, okay, this is how we're going to define a customer, a very basic example of data governance. This is how we define a customer. What you should do is write that down. That becomes a policy that you manage and you manage over time. And maybe you want to change it down the road, but that's a governance policy. Then you would take that, you would implement that in MDM. You'd also use it to define your data models, by the way. So I would argue even data modeling is a function of is an output of a governance process. Because how do you build a data model without understanding how you define that data object? How do you define the joins between tables unless you understand the relationship between those objects? Well, that relationship is inherently a data governance decision. So people used to say to me all the time, well, we're going to implement MDM and we'll get to data governance later. I was like, well, you're not. If you're implementing MDM, you're doing governance. You're just not saying you're doing governance, but trust me, you are. So these things are hardwired together, at least through the perspective of taking that outcome-driven approach that I was talking about. Checking what we got. Okay, Ben, I'll answer. I'll answer the layup. So Ben, who is one of my peers here at Profisee, has asked a very good question that I used to get all the time when I was at Gartner, which is this notion of we have a CDP, right? So my company has implemented a customer data platform in support of our digital marketing efforts, typically. And if we have that, do we need an MDM? Answer, probably. Probably. What I saw over and over and over and over again was CDPs are built for a very, very specific use case. CDPs are built for marketers. They are marketer-friendly tools with very easy to use UIs that allow marketers to do some very basic things to allow them to what they call activate campaigns, right? Meaning, can I create a single view of my customer? so that I can take that single view and I can push that data into downstream marketing systems like email systems or like content management systems or other things that are actually executing campaigns, right? They're sending offers, they're sending emails, they are doing a nurture campaign through some sort of digital commerce platform. CDPs are very, very good at supporting that, right? So they allow for some relatively easy integration. They allow marketers to kind of do their own data integration. They're built for high volumes of data. They are built generally around very, very basic governance and data quality rules that are heavily reliant on what I would call deterministic matching, generally meaning customer equals email address. Not always, but generally customer equals unique email address. So the capabilities there, if we were to look at a Venn diagram, over here would be MDM, over here would be CDP. There's a little bit of overlap. There's overlap from a governance perspective or a data quality perspective, creating a single persisted a store of data, although CDPs are not built to persist over the long term. But there's a lot of overlap there, particularly when it comes to single view of the customer and customer data management. But CDPs are built for marketers. They are not built for enterprise-wide use cases, right? So marketers are calling the shots. When it comes to CDPs, marketers are the ones that are defining our customer. And the way that the marketer may be defining a customer may not be how the rest of the organization needs to define it, particularly at higher levels of the organization. So CDPs, purpose-built for marketers, by marketers, built for with very, very basic data management, very, very basic data governance. They'll say they do data governance, but they really don't do enterprise class data governance. The governance that CDPs support typically is kind of the minimum bar from a regulatory and privacy perspective, meaning that they can support the idea of suppression lists. They can support do not market type stuff, like exclude this email address because it violates CCPA or something, or somebody has said please forget me, that kind of stuff. That's the governance that CDP support, but the governance they support is very different than the governance that an MDM would support. So CDPs are built for marketing use cases by marketers. MDMs are built to support enterprise-wide use cases, are far more configurable, far more powerful, far more extensible, far more flexible than a CDP ever would be. So these things work better together. So for most of my clients, when I was talking to them at Gartner, it wasn't a situation of either or. Generally, it was a situation of both, right? What we've learned over the last few years, it's really tough to say no to marketing. Right? It's tough to say no, because if you're in IT and you say, nah, no, we're not going to buy that, they'll just go buy it anyway, right? They've got their own budgets, right? I see this time and time again. They'll just go buy whatever tool that they're going to implement anyway. So a better approach would be, okay, to sit down with marketers, understand what their marketing needs are, understand what the rest of the needs are from an MDM perspective, and probably what you're looking at is implementing both, right? But where you would want to have those systems most certainly talking to each other, where the MDM was feeding data into the CDP, where you did, if you had a master customer record sitting in MDM, that you'd feed that into a CDP, and that it would be used as a reference source, getting back to Tim's previous point about reference data, that it would be used as a reference source in the CDP. So that's what I would tell my clients when asking about CDPs. But CDPs are not MDMs, and if anybody's out there trying to tell you that they are, they're not. Send them my way. Getting down to the last few questions. You're welcome, Garanga. Yes, Tim. CDP absolutely does house more transactional data, and their databases tend to be non-relational as a result, right? Like you can just drop a ton of stuff into a CDP, which puts some limits on their flexibility and scalability from a governance and stewardship perspective. So it's a trade-off, right? Can CDPs absolutely handle a lot more data and do it in kind of a more of a real-time way that an MDM could? Yes, but the trade-off that you're going to make is from a governance and stewardship perspective. CDPs typically don't even have stewardship UIs, not at least how we would define them in the MDM world. The goal would be to extract the master data attributes from the CDP. Yes, completely agree. Completely agree. Yeah, well, yes, you can use MDM to help with managed privacy policies. Yes, absolutely, Grega. Often, though, I'm seeing a lot of larger companies where the privacy policies are being managed in the systems of interaction. meaning within digital marketing platforms, within CRMs, within others, but most certainly you could use MDM for that. But often I'm seeing a lot of companies that are just using MDM as the source of truth for the customer, and knowing who is the customer, and that the privacy policies are, or at least from an implementation and execution perspective, where it's systems of interaction like digital marketing platforms and CRMs are the ones that are enforcing those rules. 4 minutes left. All right, nobody. We had a couple of brave souls that wanted to be online with me. So for anybody, Zach, Fabrice, others that if you did have specific questions, or Jimmy, if you did have specific questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And anybody here who hasn't already connected with me on LinkedIn, please do. I think there's only 3 Malcolm Hawkers, if you spell the name right, on the planet. One is, we don't have to go into detail there, but there's not many of us. So if you spell my name correctly on LinkedIn, chances are very, very good you're going to find me. We're going to do this every Friday. So if you have others that would like to talk to an ex-Gartner analyst that has talked to hundreds of CIOs and CDOs, send them this way. Last Friday of every month, we'll do this for an hour. Yes, GDPR. Yes. Yeah. So Tim, my point being is that in a lot of the conversations that I've had with large companies, privacy policies, or the implementation of, or the management of those rules are typically happening in systems of interaction, but where they would defer back to the MDM as a source of truth for who is this person, right? Who is this person, where there may be, as a part of the attributes of that person in the golden record, there could be things like, opt-in, opt-out status, other things that would support a GDPR, most certainly, like, please forget this person, marketing, no, right? Other flags, other attributes in an MDM where they're part of that master record. So absolutely, but where it would be, the digital marketing system or some other system of interaction that is making sure that those policies are implemented correctly. So it's both. It's not necessarily an either or. Can we put MDM at front to present bad data? Yes, Hoy, you absolutely can. So all enterprise class MDM platforms support, or should support, kind of real-time / API level integration between transactional systems and the MDM. For example, if you are creating a new record in a CRM, if you're creating a new record in any transactional system or system of interaction, you can make a real-time API-based query back into an MDM hub to say, does this thing exist or not, right? Do we already have a record for Acme Incorporated or not? Or we could even make it more of a search type functionality where you're typing and then a list kind of pops up, where you could say, is this the one that you wanted, right? Is this the Acme? It already exists. So yes, absolutely. MDMs can be put in kind of the transactional workflow to make sure that bad data or duplicate data is not being implemented. Absolutely. That's something I absolutely recommend. Does kind of complicate it, it makes it a little more complicated. That's more of what we would call an operational style of MDM. It's where most companies are trying to get to, versus more analytical MDMs that are just used to create kind of 360 views. But yes, you can absolutely put an MDM in front of those business processes. Arguably, that's going to be the greatest value of an MDM. All right, we're at time. Poof, there we are. Zach, Fabrice, Tim, Garanga, Hoy, John, Ha, Jimmy. Good to see everybody. Thank you for spending an hour of your precious day with me. Good to reconnect with some folks I haven't seen in a while. Again, please spread the word. If you've got others that would enjoy coming and picking the brain of an ex-Gartner analyst, would love to talk to them. Thanks so much for your time, guys, and we'll see you